Yahoy World. It's Doug and Max show. Ta-da! Welcome. Yeah, we're talking about marketing, talking about agency stuff. We're talking about 20-year hobbies that we gave up during COVID. That's what we've been talking about. Figured we should press record. Um, I accidentally had a little bit of this terrible 9.2 um, gingerbread beer that my wife actually bought. I had a little bit of it yesterday, and I remembered why I never drink the beer that my wife purchases, and so that's what's going on in my life. Doug, how are you? It has been a few months since we have partook in a conversation.
It has. It has. We've been crazy, keeping our head above water. A lot of opportunities presenting themselves. It's fascinating once you break that code that we talked about within a company. Just how many, especially where we work in, which is pure mid market, like just how many. Like just a real spider web of opportunity begins to present itself, and had success in launching our business analyst program. So
Yeah. Tell me more. What are you talking about? I like the sound of it. More opportunity. Yes. You mean like you've been like unlocking opportunity within current clients, or you've
yeah.
been finding opportunity in the market? Like what's the breakthrough here?
Well, we've been finding both. So what we have found, what's become our recipe, if you will, is we get involved with a company that's implementing new technology, often CRM. We live by what we call the prime directive. Whenever we touch technology, which is the business process needs to drive the technology should never dictate the business process. And
Ah,
so
I thought you mean that you can never make contact.
well, correct. So we're not we do influence species on other planets. We haven't made that commitment. So we have
This is a Star Trek reference, right? Like I'm not.
it is.
Okay, okay. I just wanted to make sure we're in the right
Yeah,
decade.
we stole that as that's the rule that you never violate. The rule you never violate is the technology should never dictate the business.
Well, there are many rules you should never violate, but yes, in this particular case,
That is a fair point.
business process drives technology. I digress. Please go on.
So anyway, so as a part, the first part of any implementation we do is a series of deep dives to understand how they're going to market overall, who's doing what, how's the sales organization work, how's the marketing organization work, how does that connect to operations, et cetera. We then implement the CRM as an example. And one of the deliverables when we're done is an assessment of, okay, hey, while we've been doing all this and getting everything set up so that so that your new technology is ready to rock and roll, we've made some observations. Would you like us to share them with you? And lo and behold, they all go, well, yeah, please do.
Yeah, the old I know something you don't know.
Exactly. And so that then leads oftentimes to ongoing support and management, looking at how to adapt their marketing processes, especially from a more traditional, just straight demand gen to, we do a lot of work in manufacturing and industrial. So getting them to understand what does account centric go to market really mean? What does that look like? What does the marketing function look like when it's part of a sales led motion? At the same time, what does the sales team have to do that's different? And one of the things that we identified is, if you take a look at best in class companies, a role that's very important is the business analyst role. And that is looking at data and understanding what's going on, and data through the lens of process and process improvement. And most companies don't have business analysts. And if you hire a business analyst without insight, and without good oversight, then that can lead to havoc. And so we've kind of built that business analyst capability that can plug into a company and provide the equivalent capabilities and insights to help them drive better decisions.
Well, a couple of things stand out because I've been running around saying that the biggest problem the biggest plague to marketing is a lack of access. We've been put at the kids' table. We've been
Mhm.
given the crayons, but we can only color in the lines. And the key to additional value at the organization lies in whatever the heck all the other departments are really charged with, and what their challenges are. So what this is not, to be clear, I think, is a marketing analyst or a marketing analytics role, which I've seen in the last 10 years has really been really amounts to here is performance. Here is just the performance. But what you're describing is not only performance in marketing, but performance across sales, across product. And then more than just performance, there's also looking at business process and
Correct.
the impact of that. So this is
Correct.
going far beyond here are
Yes.
your charts.
Yes, this is not, here's, we had X amount of organic search traffic last month, and
Okay,
here's,
because I want to be clear about that, because every agency on planet Earth is like, we have an analyst role.
right,
They
right.
they report we have, return on ad spend. That's what our analyst does. This is not that we're talking about now. This is so you're talking about this in the present tense, like these are recent breakthroughs. What has prevented you in the past from establishing these kinds of relationships or deeper conversation?
Um, there were probably two key restraints that we've made a lot of progress on that have enabled us to have this breakthrough in the last 6 months. One is client selection. Candidly, we were working with companies that just weren't big enough to sustain and to support that type of function. It's interesting. I was talking with somebody about just data analysis and business intelligence, et cetera, and the nature of companies that really leverage that and really allocate resources to that. They're looking for 1% differences that make material differences in the business. And so there's if you've got 12 people, nothing against 12 people and nothing against having services that support a company with 12 people. It's just, if you have 12 people, a 1% difference isn't going to make that much of a difference. If you have 1,000 people, it's going to make a very big difference.
I talk a lot about that with churn or upsell. Is that like a small agency? If you're good at upselling, the new logos are probably still more important or more impactful.
Mhm.
But if you've got 100 clients and you get 1% better at upselling, well, the opportunity is far bigger on the services side.
Correct.
So yeah, the differences between, but what I would also argue that there, and we've seen this like working with Databox and Pete Caputa.
Mhm.
I do think the maturity of the leader and the decision making process. Like I do not see companies using data to make better decisions and bringing in a role to look at data across departments if they do not have an established decision making process. Like if you ask a company how do you make decisions, and they can tell you here's who's involved on an annual basis, here's who's involved on a quarterly basis, here are the types of decisions we're making. They're they see a lot of value in a role that can bring them insights and can bring them cross departmental data because they know exactly when and where that's going to be important.
One of the things that we've done, and I hadn't thought about it until you just mentioned this, is we actually help them develop that. And maybe there was a third element that held us back. One of the things where these conversations start is helping them to define how should they make decisions. I think that we're not working with companies that magically or have been pre-built and they've got these great. I mean, there are some situations where I'm working with $1 billion company where some of the things that they had in place before we started working with them, it was like my mom and pops that I used to work with had greater insight and more actual data about what was going
Just
on.
because they're bigger doesn't mean they function
Correct.
better.
Correct. And in some ways they just have bigger dysfunction with momentum that so really helping them. I mean, we're really good at going in, understanding a company and working with them to create a framework for how to go about making decisions and how to go about taking action. And I think that's one of the places where a lot of times that data that you're sharing at whatever level, even at that marketing data level and certainly up to business data, is we share this data and we think that it's like, oh, well, that should give you the answer. And I've always said data is valuable when it prompts your thinking, and data is most valuable when it leads you to ask better questions. So I sometimes refer to this as hypothesis-driven growth. How do you go into every 90-day period? What is your hypothesis? What is it that you're looking to move? What's the needle you're looking to move? How are you looking to do that so that at the end of each period, you're also learning and applying that to your next iteration? And so those cycles enable you to accelerate. And what we see is companies actually start doing less, which gives them more to allocate towards what they're doing that enables them to do better. And having that conversation, that's where the secret sauce is, being able to have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, as service providers, we have two equally bad problems that stem from no decision-making process on the client side. One is they decide to do everything.
Correct.
And it's chaos. And we walk into a rat's nest and everybody's overwhelmed and nobody knows how to measure anything. Or they decide to do nothing. And their entire organization culturally is decision by committee, and any one person on that committee that's somewhat scared, so nothing ever happens, nothing ever changes. So I think that establishing that decision-making process and saying, look, we're going to take the guesswork out of it. We're going to create a system, create a cycle, and we need to make a decision on what we're going to prioritize and the information we're going to use to inform said thing.
Yeah, and I think one of the places where service providers are actually part of the problem and they think that they're part of the solution is we have a tendency to speak to our clients in lists. Well, you can do
lists?
In lists. Yes.
Okay, they said lisps. Yeah. I was like, hey, now, come on.
No, lists.
Articulate, Doug.
I'm doing my best. It's Friday.
Okay, lists.
You could do this. You could do this. Like, well, we give them 4 options, or we give them 3 options, right? As opposed to, we think you should do X because Y. Here's how we'll know that we're on the right course. Here's what'll tell us if we're on the wrong course, right? We're afraid of being wrong, and so we actually, feed into that fear of making a decision. One of my favorite pieces of trivia is: did you know the word decide and the word homicide both have the same suffix, and both mean the same thing? They both actually mean to kill.
Ideas.
Yep.
Yeah.
When you make a decision, you are saying no. By saying yes to this, you're saying no to everything else. By the way, the biochemical response that people go through when making decisions is the exact same biochemical response as when they're under threat. It is a high caloric, high intense, very uncomfortable thing to do, right? People don't like to make decisions. It's hard.
Yeah, so the lack of decision that we all experience, because if you've ever sold anything, you know that 3 out of 5 is no decision.
Correct.
1 out of 5 is a terrible decision, and 1 out of 5 is you.
Yep. Yep.
Unless you're also a terrible decision, but we can talk about that later. So what you're saying is those 3 out of 5 options is a survival instinct. 3 out of 5 being the do nothing. That's like a fight or flight. It's flight.
It's flight. Yeah. Yeah. And in its own way, it's got a fight element too. That's where, like, the saying yes to everything is kind of the fight. You just add more and more and more chaos. But by the way, one of the other things that's important is you've got to be able to tell people what to stop doing, not just what they should also do, right? There's tremendous.
Something's got to give. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important for anything that right. People are already overwhelmed because for the last 2 years, at least, I don't know about before that, for the last 2 years, everyone has been charged with doing more with less. Mm-hmm. And so where we had a lot of vendors doing things and we had money for it, now a lot of these teams have all this pressure on them and they've had to bring it in-house. So to come in and say, well, by the way, the data says that we're missing this whole thing here, and we need to execute on this. It's like you also need permission to say we need to cut some of this stuff that's not working.
You also need to say sometimes, you know what, we don't have the data to inform. We need to start. These are the steps we need to take so that we can start getting the data. Right? There's a lot of times where the data is just not there.
Okay.
And
So
having that conversation is a viable conversation that a lot of people steer away from because they're afraid to be wrong.
so you talked about two restraints, and I got you off topic, and we added a third. The first one was client selection. That's huge. A magic third one was how they should make decisions.
Decision frameworks. Yep.
The decision frameworks as a breakthrough. What's a third one?
We raised our prices.
Oof. I just did an analysis on this for an agency. So go on.
So we fell into the trap. We would price to win, and we would what I refer to as price to grow. Hey, this is a really big opportunity. If we can start off working here, we'll do that. We'll do this great stuff, and then we'll be able to add on, and we'll be able to add on, and we'll be able to add on. Right. And what I found was it just didn't happen. We were not growing accounts. We had the churn problem that you talk about. There was the treadmill. We actually became much more of a project-based company as a result of that. Projects can be very profitable. I finally said, you know what? We're going to price to be successful. We're going to price to solve the problem that we're being asked to solve. And if they feel like what we're asking for is too much, then so be it. But I'm not building in this aspect of they're going to become a really profitable client if. So then we were able to resource them correctly. By the way, when you come in at a arbitrarily low price, you get perceived as a low price provider, right? Where, we come in, we talk about, a $20,000 a month relationship. Well, if we need to add $10,000 a month to that for something, that's not shocking to companies. And by the way, when you're talking about impacting tens to hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, part of the problem is I can't come in and tell you, you're a $200 million company and we're going to help provide the leadership and guidance to get you to 500 million. And oh, by the way, we're going to do that for $60,000 a year. Like that's just, there's
the impact. There is a mismatch between impact and fees.
Correct.
That's like these, like the person that DMs you out of the blue on LinkedIn and is like, buy my $300 course and 10x your revenue.
Correct.
It's like, dude, if you were doing that, you would be on the news tomorrow. Like you'd be the Taylor Swift of business consultants.
The other thing that's interesting is if you take a look at a company, you talked about if you don't have access to the people that make decisions, then you're in this never-ending death spiral. But one of the things that I realized was that if you look at those levels make decisions of a certain size. So if I want to get to the VP of sales at a $500 million company, that VP of sales makes multiple $100,000 plus decisions a year. When they're $10,000 decisions, there's somebody else that makes those decisions. Mm-hmm. And so if I wanted to have access to those people, I needed to speak their language. I needed to be able to talk about those right things and really have a plan to back up the promise that we're making. And by the way, I want to emphasize, we come in a lot of times and we say it's going to be 6 months before we have the data to start making these data-driven decisions, right? The reason is the data doesn't exist. We all agree that it's important to have the data. Do you want to have the data in 6 months or 6 months from now? Do you want to be in the same place you are right now, being 6 months further down the path, not having that data, right? Yeah. But being able to have the plan that backs up, here's how we're going to get it. Here's what we're going to do. And by the way, I would emphasize, here's what we're going to do when it's working. Here's how we'll know when it's not working and how we'll know to make those adjustments. There's this.
You're framing out that decision making cycle, because you have to say, okay, here's the scenario where we decide to kill it. Here's the scenario where we decide to mend the wounds, and here's the scenario when, if it works, we do more together. And I've been talking about that recently too. Is tell them when you are going to sell them more stuff, because it's obvious that it's working. And I said this the other day, if your clients aren't willing to grow with you, then they're not good clients.
Yeah, those are wise words. Yeah, and they talk about growth as growth pains, right? Growth is not just happy path, happy path, happy path. You're gonna love, 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 love. It's like, okay, well, here's where the problems are going to be. By the way, I learned this when I was a financial advisor. Someone would come along with an investment vehicle, and I always knew the fastest way to determine whether or not the person I was talking to had a legitimate investment vehicle or they were selling snake oil. And it was, tell me, what conditions will this investment do well, and what conditions will this investment do poorly? Because there's no such thing as an investment that only does well, right? And so if you can't talk to me, and if you don't know where things go wrong, then I can't entrust you with the type of authority to allow you to influence those decisions and to read from that, if I don't have faith that you know where things are going off track.
So you've solved at least I look at the number one problem. The beginning of the number one problem is you don't have access to budget holding decision makers. You're solving that by talking about bigger numbers. And that's one way of doing it during the sales process. Many would say, well, that lengthens the sales process. I close less deals, and okay, whatever. That's one conversation. But the second piece that I find is, say you do get access to those decision makers during the sales process, you lose access, or the behavior when you hand the project off to a services team is a much different behavior. You get fixated on the point of contact and the technicalities of what they want to report on. So tell me about, like, after the sale, what are you doing to maintain that relationship, and what have you found to be like things to watch out for?
So when the biggest thing that we watch out for, and it's the number one cause of failure. So when we run into problems, it's because we try to do too much. It's really easy going into it to say, here's the 10, 15 things we can do.
Yeah, and we see value in volume.
Correct. And when you start off, everything looks like, oh, it's going to be easy. This isn't going to take any time. There's always a messy middle. There's always an element of resistance. So it really became, it's becoming a mantra for me, which is do less with more. And make sure, are you planning to avoid failure, or are you planning for success? And if you're planning for success, that typically means you're allocating more resources, more attention, more bandwidth to it. So that's one of the big things. What happens, we work in 90-day increments. We call a 90-day period an epic. That's our terminology. So we do epic reviews. We bring authority back into the process in an epic review. By the way, this is our opportunity to grow the business. We do 2 or 3 good epic reviews. It's a pretty good indication we're going to get either an increase in what we're doing as a base, or there's going to be a project element. That's one of my favorite things, is we've got ongoing with intermittent projects that get added on top of that, right? As we're helping lead that organization to stay forward. And so when you start losing the shape of that 90-day period, when you start getting into longer things than that, you start really dealing with inertia. I got this idea. I forget who said this, but someone said one of the keys to effective project management is shrink the middle. So we don't do 1-year projects. We do 90-day projects.
I
right?
love that.
We're bringing those things together so that there's a beginning and an end, and a very limited middle.
I think you're so I talk about this a lot. There's a ton of benefit to annual contracts. The
Hmm.
retainer, I would call it a myth, because if anyone's run a retainer business, a client has canceled surprise in the middle of it. So the the myth that it's safer is actually, I think, just
Hmm.
breeds the environment of we didn't see it coming.
Yep.
Uh, and then projects are much more profitable. They're much easier to control. They're much more profitable. There's defined beginning and ends. So I love to see that baseline of a strategic consulting advisory relationship that gives you an ongoing relationship. And I would always do quarterly contracts, but I would give them the vision of multiple. I would give them the vision of a year or 2 years.
Correct.
Hey, you don't have to sign up for this, but I want to talk to your team about how we're going to help you with your 3-year plan.
Correct.
Um, so you invest in collaborating on that long-term plan while providing very defined quarterly things. And then you've got a bag full of projects that you know exactly when to wield those projects.
Yep.
And that's what I like your epics. That's what your 90-day epics are. And by the way, I think you get the line of the day, which is bring authority into the process.
Hmm.
I love that,
100%. Yep.
because people say, "Oh, when was the marketing leader?" It's like, look, I don't care what their title is.
Correct.
Do they have authority
Correct.
to buy or cancel
Hmm.
what we're doing?
Hmm. And if you don't have that authority, then what's going to happen is, inevitably, if you're doing something that matters, you're going to encounter inertia and resistance. And the question is, who's got the charge? And by the way, well, we both know Dan Sullivan, and Dan's the person who taught me this. He said, if someone loves what you do for free, I mean, sorry, if someone likes what you do for free, they'll love it if they pay $50,000 for it. Right. And I've always remembered that. So if, I apply that to 5,000 as well. And,
Yeah.
and that's that aspect about us raising the prices. So we're talking about the types of funds that level person has spent. And I'll tell you, when they've committed, $150,000 for the quarter, they damn sure want to make sure that progress is happening. And if it's their team that's preventing the progress, you know, let me know what's going on, and we'll make sure we handle that resistance. And again, you're not rolling your day-to-day context under the bus by any means, but it's under a different charter within the organization.
Well, we got to do this again, Doug.
Would love to.
For those of you listening to Beers with Max, if you're binging on the show, don't operate any heavy machinery. Tip your waitress. See you next time, Doug. Happy breakthroughs.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.